Gotta do the don't go about me. It's TSM, one step at a time, breaking the chains that held me blind. I'm learning to live, finding my way, step by step. I'm breaking away with every pore. I'm claiming my life. It's TSM, I'm ready to thrive. Yeah, it's TSM.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live Sinclair Method Q&A. I'm here today with Coach Samara. How are you doing today, Samara?
I'm doing good.
Samara's excited because she got a mic set up and computer, so maybe you guys are going to be hearing her better today.
Yes, let me know if you hear me better.
You sound really good and loud and clear on my end, so that's
Cool.
good. Well, welcome everybody. We are streaming on several different platforms. So I see people joining us from YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. So awesome to have you guys here. We do these sessions, Samara and I, together about once a month. And it's really a time for you guys to come and get all of your TSM questions answered. Of course, we're not doctors, so we're not going to be giving medical advice, but we love to speak from our own personal experience, what the research says, and what we've seen just anecdotally with clients as well. So welcome to everyone who's here. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat wherever you're joining us from, on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or Twitter, wherever you are, and we would love to get to them. So thanks for joining, everyone. Okay, so Samara, oh, there's Steve. Welcome, Steve.
Yes, Steve, hi. Good to see you.
So let's kick things off, Samara, I want to ask you, because you work with a lot of people, not only in like Thrive groups, but you do a lot of one-on-one coaching. What's kind of a theme you've seen manifesting lately, if there is something that's perhaps a common challenge people are having, a question, concern, anything like that around their TSM journey?
That is a really good question. I guess I would say that I see a lot of, well, now that we really speak in terms of the phases now, where we're viewing the Sinclair method in terms of these three phases, which is really helpful actually. I see people like in phase one wanting to hurry up and do things that are really set for phase two. And so it's kind of like it's a really cool way to just bring them back to, oh, it's one step at a time. Phase one is all about familiarizing yourself with the medication protocol and getting those extinction sessions in, and not really worrying about, needing to reduce or, all kinds of like willpower things. You don't have to do willpower things. You could just, this method really meets you where you're at, you know, with your drinking and your habits. And it's a very gentle and forgiving method, and it meets you right where you're at. And then you just take it from there. And eventually, in phase two, you may be able to implement reduction techniques at that point,
Yeah,
but it'll be much easier because you would have gone through phase one. So,
100%.
yeah, so it's like this process and just trusting the process. And now we have much better language for what the process looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm glad you bring up the phases, because I know that's a question that people asked on our last Q&A, to kind of dive into those. So if people are curious, what are the phases, we can speak more about that. But I really appreciate the phases because it's more descriptive of, where someone's at on their journey as far as, naltrexone compliance and progress. It's not necessarily linked to the time that they've been on the method. Of course, we kind of say the first few months are phase one, generally speaking, but it's more about where people are at in their mindset and the progress on
Mhm.
the journey. So it's not necessarily tied to a specific timeline. And I think it's also really helpful because phase one, there really should be some core foundational things that people need to know and learn in phase one in order to successfully move on to phase two. I was just telling you before we went live, working with some people inside Thrive who are like 6 months, a year into TSM and realizing they don't have like this foundational piece of information that they should have had in month one. And we're, improving our program to see, okay, how do we get that information to them? But without that core information, for example, one of our members didn't really know about the timing of her redosing, and working with her doctor on, oh, she actually needed a second dose of the medicine and didn't know that. And so she'd been on the method for a year, not knowing about redosing,
Wow.
that basic thing that we talk about a lot, but it can get overlooked because there are a lot of things to know as you get started on the method. So yeah, I think the phases and approaching it with that mindset is helpful because, like you said, it's building that foundation and then working toward drink reduction and habit change and then working toward extinction. So it's a process.
Absolutely.
Okay, so welcome again to those of you who have joined. I see we have a question here from Wanda. We would love to answer this. And for those of you who have just joined, if you have questions for us, please feel free to drop them in the chat wherever you're joining us from, and we would be happy to get to them. So Wanda asks, are hangovers worse on naltrexone even after 3 glasses of wine? So I'm guessing that maybe she now feels hungover after 3 glasses where maybe she didn't before. So Samara and I can probably both speak to that. What would you say, Samara?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated answer, and our doctor support, Dr. V, we call him, on our program, he really helps in kind of uncovering this kind of mystery. But from my knowledge, it's like a combination of losing what's it called? Katie, I can't think of the word. What's it called? Losing
The endorphin or the
no,
reward?
no, like, where you can drink more and not feel as much like of a hangover the next day, but then
The tolerance?
the tolerance, that's the
Okay.
word. I was like, what is that word? Tolerance.
Brain fart.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saving me.
I'm here for you, Samara.
Yeah, I know I can count on you. Yeah, it's a combination of losing that tolerance along with, you're also taking this medication and drinking on it. And the medicine itself, from my knowledge, from my experience, was very dehydrating. And I didn't even realize I was dehydrated. And then I was drinking, which is also dehydrating. And so then, next day, if you're really dehydrated, you're going to have a worse hangover, right? So I kind of had to maneuver and figure things out like through trial and error. And I figured out that if I hydrated really well before my extinction session, I would have a much better day, the next morning. So that was something that I learned. And then it was that losing the tolerance, which is a real thing. As we lose tolerance, we may experience more withdrawals like the next morning, right? So what do you have to say about it, Katie?
No, that's true. It's interesting that you found that the medication was dehydrating because, as we know, drinking dehydrates us. And so the combination of the two, I could see would make it worse. And I know Wanda said 3 glasses of wine. There's something with the tannins in the red wine, and especially if it's US wine, it has a lot of sugar compared to European wine, right? You were talking about that recently in an article in Thrive, weren't you, Samara?
Yeah, it's actually the nitrates and nitrites. It's like these 2 types of preservatives that American wine has a much more of. Now it's naturally found in wine, but not to this level. They add more in to preserve it. Well, I found that French and Italian wines don't have them. And so I actually, during the Sinclair method, switched to Italian wine only, which I found it very easy to find, by the way. And it made such a difference. So if that's something that you can do, Wanda, yeah, it made a huge difference. And I could find it at my local grocery store. It was imported from Italy, you know, um, and yeah, huge difference on the next morning.
And my husband, he's from France, and he always says how American wines are so sweet, whereas if you drink a French wine, it's not as sweet. So even he has worse hangovers on the wine and he doesn't drink much, but he'll have a headache the next day with like 2 glasses of American wine, whereas with French wine, 2 glasses he won't. So all this to say, there is some connection, I think, with naltrexone and red wine. That just seems to be a pattern. I know I noticed it for myself as well. The longer I was on naltrexone, again, the tolerance was decreasing. So I wasn't drinking as much. So I couldn't process the alcohol like I used to be able to when I was drinking a lot. So I think that is a factor. But then also I noticed I could have 2 beers and be fine, but 2 glasses of wine would leave me hungover. So that's something to consider. Samara's advice on hydrating, I think that's huge. I mean, even pre-naltrexone, just drinking a ton of water before a night of drinking, the hangover would be more mild the next day. And then also, I always remember a doctor friend of mine years ago when I was on naltrexone, he told me, because I would feel also a little bit blue the next day after drinking on naltrexone. Like I wouldn't feel very like happy. I would just feel a little like blah, I guess you could say. And he was like, well, naltrexone is blunting the euphoric effects of drinking, and alcohol is a depressant. So if you're not getting the euphoric, perhaps the depressing effects could be more noticeable or enhanced because the euphoria is not there to like kind of counterbalance it. So that's something else that I don't know as part of your naltrexone hangover, if it's more just symptomatic of like nausea and headache, or if it has to do with emotion as well. Something to consider.
That is a really good point, by the way. So it could be a combination of like all of those things happening,
Yeah.
right?
Plus the tolerance. I mean, the tolerance is a huge thing because even if we're drinking 25% less, like our body just isn't used to the same amount of alcohol as we once were able to drink. But I do think there's a connection. Some people say there's no such thing as a naltrexone hangover, and I don't agree with that. I really think there is something, and it's probably not just one reason for it.
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I did experience those naltrexone hangovers slash we call them nalovers, I guess. But I did experience them, but later on in my journey. So in the beginning, I really didn't notice much, but as I was continuing to reduce over time, um, I lost that tolerance and I would experience these like nalovers. And it kind of just I used it as fuel to reach extinction, I kind of viewed it as like, okay, I'm ready to not have hangovers anymore. Like, I don't want to live that kind of life. I don't want to have hangovers. So I did kind of used it to propel me forward in my quest to reach extinction.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Like, let's be real, there is maybe some disappointment if we can't drink at the same level we used to because the hangovers are too much. But that's ultimately why we're on TSM. Like, we want to drink less. And so that's the same thing I did, Samara, where if I felt crummy the next day, I would be frustrated with myself, but then I would be like, okay, well, this is just a motivator to not drink for a few days or to really be more mindful during my next drinking session or think back to why, I drank more or what alcoholic beverage caused it. So yeah, it can be fuel as part of the motivation to continue to make progress for sure. That's a good point.
Awesome.
Okay, Barbara says, I have had 3 alcohol-free days so far with 5 was on naltrexone. 5 weeks on naltrexone.
Oh,
Okay.
5 weeks.
On
I
those
see.
on those alcohol-free days, I am not taking naltrexone to force me not to drink. Thoughts? Okay, so
On those alcohol-free days. Okay.
you've had 3 alcohol-free days and 5 weeks on naltrexone, and on your alcohol-free days, you're not taking naltrexone and forcing yourself to drink. Thoughts? Okay. Do you understand the question?
Force me not to drink. So you're doing the Sinclair method, right, Barbara? You're essentially that's the Sinclair method, right? You're not taking naltrexone on those alcohol-free days.
Yeah, that would be the question. And I'm wondering if you're not forcing yourself to drink on your alcohol-free days, which, I mean, if that is the question, I will just say with TSM, it's such a gentle process and it truly meets you where you're at. There's no real need to force yourself to do anything that you don't feel like doing. If you're having alcohol-free days and you don't feel like drinking, you don't need to force yourself to drink to make progress. Some people say, oh, do I need to have a lot more drinking sessions in the beginning to make progress faster? Not necessarily, because alcohol-free days are really beneficial too. You know, that's where you're going to teach your brain other pleasurable activities because you won't have naltrexone in your system. So you don't need to force alcohol-free days too early, but you also don't need to force drinking days if you don't feel like drinking. Now, there's a difference between forcing it and white knuckling something versus, you know, being a little more disciplined and challenging yourself. Like you do,
Yeah.
especially in phase 2, need to challenge yourself more, set goals, be more mindful, change habits, things like that. But Barbara, if you could clarify your question a bit, just so we make sure we're answering it, or if
Yeah.
we did answer it.
I think what I did, and this was kind of like a phase one motto that I had was I had a no white knuckling motto. You know, I had white knuckled it my whole, like the last 15 years of my life, trying to quit drinking like 300 times. And I was done. Like now that I had this information and the science was clear, I was like, okay, I don't need to white knuckle it anymore. So I just, in order to do that, I would just um, kind of learn how to gauge where my craving level was at. Because if it was on a high, you know, if I had a high craving level that day, that would, I would deserve to have an extinction session that day. Like I would go ahead and honor that craving. And I know it's such a totally insane way to think about this. It's not intuitive, you know, when you're coming from an abstinence based background, which we all do come from that, right?
Yeah.
It's not intuitive. It's actually counterintuitive, and you know, it is a paradigm shift to really think of it this way, but it is very freeing and forgiving and gentle. I know we keep saying that. Yeah, it's just, so I followed this no white knuckling motto, and that way I did what my craving level said. You know, like
Yeah.
if my craving was low that day, I would see if I could challenge myself to have an alcohol-free day,
Yeah.
you know? So I wasn't forcing myself to do one thing or the other, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, that's well said. And Barbara elaborated a bit more. So it sounds like she is white knuckling her alcohol free days, but she's not
Oh,
had alcohol free days in at least 15 years.
okay.
So maybe, I mean, you're 5 weeks in, you know, that's still early. Maybe you're just not ready for alcohol free days yet. Again, back to the idea of not necessarily forcing things in the beginning. If we were to put a timeline on phase 1, what would you, I would say like 0 to 3 months is like roughly phase 1. So Barbara, I don't think you necessarily need to force yourself to have alcohol free days if they're white knuckled at this point. You can work on other strategies like making sure you're taking naltrexone and you're totally compliant. Do you need to talk to your doctor about redosing? Are you always eating a meal when you drink? Are you hydrating? Are you logging your drinks? Really, again, securing that foundation to make sure you're doing everything correctly with this TSM protocol. And once that foundation is strong, then alcohol free days will start to come. They might feel a little bit difficult and they might feel challenging. You might need to practice at them, but I wouldn't say you need to necessarily like white knuckle it just for the sake of having an alcohol free day, especially being
Mhm.
just, you know, a little over a month in. What would you say, Samara?
Well, I would like to just share some personal experience with clients that I have. I mean, I have a few clients. One didn't have an alcohol-free day for 4 months.
Yeah.
One didn't have an alcohol-free day for 5 months. Um, and I know that sounds daunting too, because it's like, wow. But, you know, they kind of, their motto was kind of to let this thing ride out and see when it's easier to have an alcohol-free day. And when they did eventually have alcohol-free days, it was effortless. That's how they
Mm.
described it. Effortless. Which is really interesting, right? To totally different than trying to white knuckle through
Yeah.
something. So yeah, you know, getting those extinction sessions in on naltrexone is like, it's so important for phase one, especially.
Yeah. Yeah, like what Samara means by the extinction sessions, it's like maybe your brain just needs more time drinking on naltrexone and not getting the reward. Because if you keep repeatedly doing that, it's a beautiful thing. If you have a craving, you can surrender to it, trusting that if I take naltrexone before, it's like chipping away at that pathway that's been in my brain for sounds like 15 years or more for you, Barbara. So drinking on naltrexone is necessary. And I know sometimes we can feel guilty, like we're trying to force ourselves to be further along than we should be. Because like Samara said, it's counterintuitive. We feel guilty for drinking because we've had such a oftentimes abstinence-based mindset when it comes to recovery. But understanding it could be more helpful for you to have, more extinction sessions just to continue reinforcing that. And, also plan for that alcohol-free day in the future or begin working up to it. Something that some people find helpful is they like pick one day a week where they're going to be working up to that alcohol-free day. So they'll drink later in the day, or they'll start planning other activities or things like that. So yeah, it's such a personalized journey. I mean, you were talking about clients who haven't had alcohol-free days for months. I've known people who they've been on it for even a year or so. And not to say that that's like ideal, but for some people, if they've been drinking for 30, 40 years, it takes time, but it doesn't mean they're not progressing. It's just this very ingrained habit that, needs to be broken over time. And again, TSM is done at your own pace. You don't need to move at a pace that you're not comfortable with.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow. She says I've reduced from 4 drinks daily to 1.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. You're
Yeah.
almost there.
Yeah. And
Have not been effortless, right? So yeah, you're almost there.
yeah. And in the beginning, I would say for me, my alcohol-free days were not effortless either. They took effort to plan and like think about other things that I would do because it wasn't a habit yet. I was
Mm.
like automatically drinking every day. So
Mhm.
in the beginning, they were more planned, intentional, sometimes uncomfortable. Sometimes I'd plan for one and I would drink anyway. But the more you practice them, the more effortless they become.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't really be like white knuckled. Like if you're thinking about drinking all day and you're just fighting that urge, it might be better to surrender to the urge and have a drinking session on now. That's maybe what I would do.
Yep, it's a true harm reduction method, and the naltrexone is the lifesaver because it can curb binge drinking. It's known for that. So, you're basically protecting yourself against
Yeah.
binging.
Yeah. I mean, reducing from 4 drinks daily to 1, has that been hard, or is it effortless, Barbara, for you to stop at the 1, like, and have that off switch in your brain? I would be curious. Yeah. And for other people who are here, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat wherever you're joining us from. We'll do our best to get to them. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just reading this.
Perfect.
Yeah, some people too, they start on TSM and they're already like you, Samara, you had alcohol-free days naturally because you were a binge drinker. So that's a different story for people who, aren't drinking every day when they start the treatment. And Barbara, I think for us daily drinkers, it is a little bit more challenging because alcohol is a part of our daily lives. And I think a lot of people, once they start on naltrexone, they can see more clearly a couple months in how much their drinking is done out of habit.
Mhm.
And I don't know, sometimes I think the habit is almost more difficult to break than doing the TSM protocol. Like for me, it was because it takes effort. And, like I've heard you say, drinking was your purpose, like for so long, right? Like it's how you spent your free time. It's what you love to do. And it's
It's
a
the only
process.
thing I thought about.
Yeah. You look forward to it. You use it to cope, to unwind, to celebrate. Even with naltrexone, like that's a can of worms we open up. And I think that's where some people have, like, they'll start TSM, they'll feel this like pink cloud of just excitement. Yes, I finally found this treatment. And then the newness of it kind of wears off and they realize, oh, there's like more work to it than just taking a pill. I heard one of our members say this recently. And that's where it's like, okay, the reality of it sets in, which the medication is incredible. It creates that space inside us to be able to do that work, but it's still work, right? Somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where Thrive Alcohol Recovery comes in. I swear, because like the book is really factual, and it really helps you understand like the science and that that it's a real neural pathway and you're unwinding that neural pathway, you're rewiring. But then there's like this whole emotional, psychological side, where we've depended on this. Like for me, it was like my BFF, it was my boyfriend. I even considered it like a boyfriend. And that was like hard to think about giving that up as my boyfriend. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it was really hard. And I actually went through a grieving process.
Right.
I grieved the loss. I had a real loss. It was a loss. And at first I felt shame because I was feeling a loss over this. But then I realized as I kind of dived into self-compassion, these are all concepts that we talk a lot about in our program. I realized that it is a real loss, and I'm
Yeah.
allowed to grieve this, and I'm allowed to feel sad, and I'm allowed to fully, like, let this thing go in the way that I was doing it, which was grieving, you know?
Yeah.
I and there was a lot of times I was just sleeping a lot on the method. I think partly I was dealing with kind of withdrawals, or not withdrawals, but well, maybe, yeah, like, just the damage that alcohol had done to my body for
Mhm.
so long. And the other part was psychological. I was just going through a lot,
Mhm.
emotionally. And it was a transition. It was a real change that was taking place, but it was gradual. So it wasn't totally noticeable every day,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and, like, we really have to be ready for that change, and I think, it's okay, in my view, to be, like, at a plateau for a while in TSM. I work with people who they're taking naltrexone, but they're not really motivated to do much else, and to me, I'm like, "That's okay," because we're gonna be at that plateau, and eventually we're gonna get tired of it, and that's gonna be fuel for our motivation to, okay, take it to the next level, feel more committed to, like, make the change, feel more motivated to make the change, but like I did not realize when I went on naltrexone what a can of worms I was opening as I was like decoupling myself from this very intimate relationship I had with alcohol for 10 years. Like you talked about, it's this lover, it's this best friend, it's there for us no matter what. We know exactly what to expect. And that's not something that just goes away. It really is this like mourning process as you let go of the relationship you had with it. And naltrexone makes that so much easier to do. But
Yes.
especially for us daily drinkers, it's like I just remember thinking like, well, what else am I going to do in the evening? Like I drink every day and I've done that for 10 years. Like I don't even know what I like to do. How am I going to spend my weekends? I day drink all day Saturday, Sunday. Like it was like overwhelming to rediscover who I was and what I like to do. But it was also a really beautiful process. But we have to have this drive to rediscover that. And as we change our drinking habits. And yeah, this is why Samara is huge on talking about like self-compassion and just uh kind of, I mean, I talk about it as like I had to learn to respect myself again through
Yeah.
this treatment because the way I treated myself with alcohol, I abused myself for 10 years. I sabotaged. And so
Hmm.
as we start on this treatment, we can be in that automatic thought pattern of just beating ourselves up for not progressing fast enough or seeing changes quickly enough. But we have to learn to treat ourselves respectfully, be kind to ourselves, be gentle with this process. And there's no race. You can take your time. It's a big change, even though you're just taking one little pill. It's a lot that's changing over time for sure.
Yeah.
So I see a couple questions came in from Laura. Is it good to just stop altogether after drinking for many years, or should you slowly stop? Do you want to answer that from the TSM perspective?
Yeah. So as far as TSM or the Sinclair method, it's a gradual, slow reduction. You actually have to take the medication and drink on it. And they say the theory is 100 times. You do that 100 times plus, for the new level of control over alcohol that you're going to receive. Um, so yeah, it's a gradual process. And then once you get to this subjective place, which is this this extinction feeling that you'll have, you can make that decision at that point if you want to abstain from there on and you just want to you're done with alcohol, kind of like what Katie did,
Yeah.
6 years now, right? 6 years,
Yeah.
6 years.
Yeah.
Or you could go on to be a moderate drinker and you can decide your own standards for drinking. And that's kind of what I did. I didn't really want to I didn't want to enforce abstinence for myself just because I felt like I'm the type of person that likes to break rules and stuff. So
Yeah.
if I put like a rule on myself, I might like want to break it or
Break
something.
it.
So I I just decided to just see where, I did define what kind of standards I would have. So I have very kind of strict standards around my drinking. Like I don't drink more than 2 glasses of wine in a sitting, right?
Yeah.
I don't ever have shots. I don't drink liquor.
Yeah.
I basically only drink Italian wine. I'm like super snobby about that.
You're
Like
like,
I
I
won't,
became a wine snob through TSM.
yeah, like I won't even have American wine. Like I won't. But it's just like I don't, it's not like a white knuckled type thing, it's literally it's just a decision, like a choice that I've made that and every few months I'll have a special occasion and I'll take my naltrexone
Hmm.
and I'll be able to have the wine. But it's just like I don't I'm not looking forward to that day. I didn't write it on my calendar. I'm like, okay, I can't wait to it's not like that. It's literally out of sight, out of mind. It's not the way that I think. I don't think about drinking. It's just
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to
And
describe.
I know once you experience it, it's complete freedom. But Laura, to your point, like generally depending how much you're drinking, if it's a lot, it's not considered safe by most experts to just quit abruptly if there are withdrawal concerns. Um, David Sinclair, who created the Sinclair method, he talks about the Sinclair method being a type of alcohol detox in a way because
Mm,
you're taking naltrexone and drinking on it, and over time you're gradually reducing your drinking over time because it's fixing the issue in the brain, which is the root cause of excessive drinking and alcohol addiction. It gradually reverses that over 6, 9, 12, 18 months, depending on the person. And then when that happens, you just find that you don't really crave alcohol anymore. The desire for it fades away gradually, and it's much easier to have control if and when you do drink. So Samara and I are huge proponents of the Sinclair method and drink reduction as opposed to like cold turkey abstinence in the beginning, because her and I both for years, or Samara for decades even, tried abstinence and it didn't work because the alcohol deprivation effect, which is part of David Sinclair's research, where essentially when you are addicted to alcohol and you quit, it actually increases your craving and motivation for it. So that leads most people back to relapsing again. So that's where the Sinclair method is amazing because you completely bypass the deprivation period. You're working to reduce your drinking and fix the root issue in the brain. So we specialize in and support people using the Sinclair method for drink reduction. Whether your goal in the end is to be alcohol free, I quit drinking over 6 years ago, and others choose to drink moderately.
yes. So for the vast majority of people, abstinence leads to relapse. That's crazy, huh?
Yeah.
And that is the way the developed world has thought about recovery is through abstinence. So this just throws that on its head, doesn't
Yeah, it
it?
completely does. And we feel like such failures when we genuinely when we go abstinent from alcohol, we genuinely want to fix this issue. We're not doing it just for the sake of like trying to, impress people or whatever. Like if we go to AA or we try to quit drinking or try to moderate, it's because we want to fix the issue. And when we can't, when we fail at it, it just degrades our integrity. It makes us feel like a terrible person. We get
Hmm.
shame around it. We feel like the failure. But the truth is, when you quit drinking, it's a fact that your brain goes into deprivation mode and you end up wanting it more. So you're basically set up to fail with that type of treatment. Now, of course, some people can do it and like totally mad respect to those people,
A
but
small amount, a
a
small
small,
amount of people.
yeah, about 10%, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and they can white knuckle it and eventually their cravings go away. Though I've had emails from people who say, oh, I haven't drank in 2 years, but I still think about drinking every day, which is like, that's awful. You just,
That's more of the the majority of people, I would say, is that's what they experience. And that's why in AA, you're an alcoholic. It's a disease and you're an alcoholic for the rest of your life. And you have to label yourself that. And why are you an alcoholic for the rest of your life? Because the cravings rule your life. And even if you try to suppress them or avoid them at all costs or try to pretend they're not there, they're there. They're there and they're in the background. And that's why people relapse, right?
Yeah, it's not because you're weak or that you're a bad person or you're not trying hard enough. It's a neurological issue that can be treated as such and is quite treatable and reversible, like for most people. Um, okay, we have a question on Instagram. I don't know if you can see it on your end, so I will read it. They say, have you seen binge drinking on TSM? They say, I'm on TSM now, but my journey struggle is how to cope with the stuff that alcohol was or is so good at numbing. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's like the crux of it right there, because
Mhm.
naltrexone will help quiet the urge to drink over time, so you don't want to drink as much. But if you've automatically been turning to alcohol to cope with stress or life's difficulties for years or decades, like you were talking about earlier, Samara, that psychological habit is still very ingrained. So even though what I hear people say is like, I didn't really feel like drinking tonight, but I did it anyway because I didn't know what else to do. So as we go on naltrexone and get extinction sessions under our belt, phase 2 is this process, and phase 3 of learning new coping skills. And that is difficult. It takes effort, but it's much easier to do because you're not fighting a craving
Yeah.
every time. So I talk about it like a coping muscle, where when we've relied on alcohol for years or decades, our coping muscle becomes very weak and feeble, and we're just using alcohol as that crutch. So as we practice new coping skills through TSM, we're drinking on naltrexone, but we're also practicing new coping skills, working out, hot baths, massages, eating good food, whatever it is that feels good and nourishing for you. As you practice those skills over time, you will strengthen your coping muscle and you will start to develop different ways to cope. I have an interview on my YouTube channel with a gentleman. It's called like Engineer with Autism Overcomes Alcohol Addiction. He was a severe case of alcohol addiction for a long time. And he talks about how he started bicycling because he knew he had to find a different way to cope.
Mm.
And he was just diligent about, okay, I'm going to force myself to go out and bike today because I had a really stressful day. He had a very stressful job as an engineer.
Mm.
And he fell in love with bicycling. And after a while, instead of thinking about alcohol, he started thinking about biking. And so the good news is our brains love to learn and develop new habits, but we have to teach it. And it takes, a couple months to teach a new habit to your brain. Could take less time or more, but the key is consistency. But just to honor the fact that developing new coping skills really is a crucial part of this process, and it's a difficult part of the process. But little by little, if you do it with consistency, you will learn new coping skills. Did you want to say anything more to that, Samara?
Yeah, that was so good. I just want to say to the Instagram user, do you believe that you can find new ways to cope with the stress that you're having? Do you believe that for yourself? Because it starts with a belief,
So true.
and it starts with asking ourselves questions like, what kind of person do I want to become? How do I want to deal with stress? How do I want to learn how to cope, right? And then from there, you take it from there, and you can little by little, like you mentioned, Katie, gradually teach yourself new ways. Like for me, I'll tell you my own experience. The year I hit extinction, I believe now, I see in hindsight, I believe the reason I had such a massive transformation that year was because I implemented these particular modalities. I did infrared saunas, I did cryotherapy, and I did red light therapy. And I started doing spin class, which I had never done before in my life. These are 4 very different health things. And they say there's so many things said about cold therapy. I mean, it literally increases emotional resilience. It literally does that. It
Wow.
raises your endorphin levels, your dopamine levels. Like cold therapy, there's so much research backing it up. If
Wow.
anything, try to find some cold therapy to do alongside the method. I really believe that that's why I experienced such a huge, drastic 180 that year. I wasn't like recovering for long, like I was like thriving that year. Did you know that, Katie, that I had
I
done
mean,
this?
I've heard you talk about cold therapy, but I didn't know it was so integral as part of your healing journey.
It was, but I just kind of now figured that out.
Wow.
Like 4 years later, I'm like, that's what it was. I had gotten involved with all of those things, and I know that that had a huge impact on my recovery. The fact that I was able to cope in new ways and I became more emotionally resilient, it was a combination of all of those things.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like picking what speaks to you because like I've done cold therapy here and there, but I don't love it. Maybe I should do it more than I do. But like, if working out doesn't speak to you, what speaks to your soul? What sounds super nourishing? For me, something that I feel was like crucial was I would go out and get like a cheeseburger and a milkshake on a Friday and like watch a rom-com. And I was like, that just feels so cozy and good. And it would allow me to have an alcohol-free Friday and cope with stress. Now, I don't really do that as much now. I have lots of other, like a menu of coping skills now, but think about what really feeds your soul outside of alcohol. Some people, they get religious about going to the gym. Other people pick up instruments. We have a guy in our program, he's like become a drummer and is in a band now, and he just loves the drumming. We have people who ride their exercise bikes. So do what speaks to you. And yeah, I mean, looking into cold therapy and whatever it is that, can produce endorphins and feels really good. Just seek it out and be hungry for it and be consistent with it because alcohol's kept us in a trap for so long. And I love, Samara, that you talked about, do you believe that you can cope outside of alcohol? Because sometimes that underlying belief is what keeps us like stuck. Maybe we don't really believe it, or we can't imagine coping on a Friday night after a stressful week without alcohol. And that's a starting point. Well, I can't really imagine it now. Okay, well, can you think of someone else who does that? And what does that look like objectively or subjectively? How do you think others have coped with that situation without alcohol? For me, I just remember thinking, oh, there's a lot of people that cope with stress without drinking. Like my husband is one of them, and I'd like observe his behavior and like, how does he do it? So I know
Yeah.
it's possible. That's the evidence, right?
Yeah, I literally found people that their lives I wanted to emulate. Like I found people like that I looked up to,
Totally.
mentors almost, like even if they didn't know me, but I saw their habits and their lifestyle, and I was like, man, I'd like to have those kind of habits. And they're not drinking a bottle plus of wine like
Mhm.
3 to 4 nights out of the week. I just know they're not. Like how are they coping? They don't seem to need that to have to unwind like in that
Mhm.
way. So how do they unwind? So I started just asking these questions, and because when we ask ourselves questions like that, open-ended questions, it leads to answers because our brain goes into a mode where it wants to find the answer to the problem, you know?
Totally.
So,
It's so true. I found that to be so true. I just found like reflecting on my TSM journey and asking these open questions, maybe the answer didn't come immediately, but like a day or two or a week later, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. So
yeah.
asking yourself even like, well, what would feel really good after a stressful day? Writing that list down, trying other things. For me, I remember I started to learn to cope. Like I said, that cheeseburger and a rom-com, and I'd be like, I can drink after that if I want to, but let me try this first. So it wasn't like being super rigid and saying I can't drink. It was just, let me try this first and then see, okay, how I feel after that. And I would be surprised that, I didn't feel like drinking after that oftentimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the belief that it's possible, like I think especially for us daily drinkers or people who've been drinking for years or decades, it's hard to even imagine life with less alcohol or going through this circumstance without drinking or, it's difficult, but use your imagination, look to other people for inspiration and just trust that it is possible. And that's the first step. Okay, Mark, sorry it's taken us a second to get to your question. He says, when starting out on TSM, is it important to change the kind of daily drink that you are used to on the medication? I mix hard alcohol for my drinks. Should I do a different drink when starting out? Thank you. You want to start with that, Samara?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I believe it as according to the Sinclair method, it is very encouraged to switch to wine or beer or seltzers like early as you can, avoiding hard liquor. Now, that being said, I'm going to be really nuanced here and say that this is just my own experience. I lost the taste for wine and beer, which were my main types of drinks before TSM, but I actually lost the taste for them. Like I was kind of grossed out by them on the Sinclair method early on. So I actually experimented with making mixed. So I would make like a vodka tonic or a vodka soda or a vodka, yeah. But I was really particular about just doing one shot per drink. So I measured it out. I made sure I just did one shot and then I did a tall glass with the rest being mixer. And I was able to do the major part of the Sinclair method with that type of drinking. So it was possible for me. And I know there are people out there saying, very dogmatic about no liquor, but I was able to do that for a time. And then I think after that I switched to seltzers, which were even way less like 5% ABV. Um, so it did work for me. So
Yeah.
there's no like rigid type of thing here. I mean, we can really, this method meets us where we're at. But I did have some standards around it. So I had to, like, I would not do doubles or triples, which is the former me, right? So I wouldn't do on the Sinclair method. I needed to be very cognizant of how much I was drinking at a time, because that's where people run into problems with liquor on the
Yeah.
Sinclair method, is that they will pour a triple or double or a triple, and then there's too much liquor that overpowers the medicine. So it kind of defeats the purpose, right? So yeah, I would love to hear what you have to say about that, Katie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, we're not really rigid at Thrive with like, you need to do this or you need to get off hard alcohol as soon as possible. We do say it's like a best practice. Like, if you're going to drink hard alcohol in TSM, do what Samara is doing, like measure it, be really mindful, because the thing is that, like you said, it can overpower the naltrexone and it's easy to outdrink the medication with hard alcohol. But even still, like if someone's used to only drinking whiskey or vodka, it's going to feel weird to switch to beer, or wine. So I find it's helpful to have drinking sessions with your drink of choice. So you're not getting that reinforcement with that particular drink. And then as you progress on the method, incorporate in lower alcohol by volume beverages, just to set yourself up for success more. With that said, I know people who have done fine drinking hard alcohol because they've been mindful. They're drinking with food in their stomach. They're not just taking straight shots. So there are some guidelines around it. So, for this person, Mark, if you mix hard alcohol for my drink. So if you're having a mixed drink, making it tall, making sure you're measuring that shot, like Samara was saying, um, and just paying attention, what happens when you drink hard alcohol versus beer, for example, noticing those differences and experimenting. Because the lessons that we remember are those that like we go through ourselves. Like us coaches can tell you something, but maybe it doesn't stick until you go through it. Like I've had people who say, okay, now I know why I shouldn't drink vodka, because I can just like drink way too much too quickly on naltrexone. So that lesson allows them to switch to a different beverage. But it's not a hard and fast rule. It is a best practice. Like having a lower alcohol beverage can be helpful. But I can think of two members in our program who red wine is their kryptonite, and they struggle to moderate even on naltrexone with red wine. But if they're having white wine or beer, it's fine. Or even
Mm.
liquor. They were having a whiskey cocktail or something they were telling me about. So it's so personalized. If I were to just summarize, like, I think it's helpful to have drinking sessions on your drink of choice so you can have that experience of not getting the same reinforcement and the reward. But just be mindful that you can outdrink naltrexone with hard alcohol more easily. You can outdrink it with other alcoholic beverages too. And what we mean by outdrinking naltrexone is you basically don't get the effects of naltrexone's off switch. So maybe you feel it maybe helping you want to slow down or stop, but you keep drinking anyway. And so you still drink a bunch, even though you've taken naltrexone. And of course, it's a gradual process with TSM. Like we need to, we're not like drinking a bunch less like from day one necessarily. It's typically a gradual reduction. I hope that makes sense. Someone on Instagram is asking, what's cold therapy?
Cold therapy. There's different versions of it. Basically, it's a cold plunge. You know, you're going in, you're plunging into maybe 50 degrees cold water, you know, and staying for a few minutes. But I was doing cryotherapy because I didn't have access to that kind of cold plunge. So, and then there's ways that if you live in a colder area, you could do it technically in the shower. You could just rinse with a cold shower after your regular shower. And you want to like gradually increase the time that you're there. So in this stream of water. Yeah, so there's different approaches of doing it, but the research is showing massive endorphins being released when done properly. Endorphins, dopamine, depression lowering, anxiety lowering. I mean, just amazing kind of results from this very simple, even free type of thing that you can do.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, and you can start slow. You know, you don't have, you know, you can so what happens is the body builds up a tolerance to the cold therapy. So you start and just dip in for a few seconds, and then the next time a little bit longer, and the next time, and finally your body starts to crave the cold. I mean, that's what I've experienced, and I've heard others speaking about the same, and your body like wants it and needs the cold. So that's I got addicted. I got addicted to that. I still do it to this day. As several times a week, I go to a place and they have this cryo chamber, and I stand in it for 3 minutes, and I'm just my body loves it. It
Wow.
loves it. Yeah, it's like having like a really clean cup of coffee, like no jitters,
Oh.
but like you feel energized afterwards, and it makes your whole day kind of better. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed it too. Like the couple times I've done it in like a cold plunge bath, like it's super cold at first, but then you don't really notice the cold after the first maybe 20, 30 seconds or something. Your body adjusts to it, it seems.
It's really hard. I mean, it's hard,
Yeah.
but doing hard things, it's called hormetic stress. You stress yourself out very briefly, that increases emotional resilience, all around resilience. So you can handle stress better in life when you expose yourself to these small stressful moments, like exercise. It's the same idea.
I
Yeah.
love that you said that because through this journey, it really is about building resilience. And resilience in ourselves, because I feel like for me at least it's like I really lacked that resilience because any tough thing life threw at me, whether I got a flat tire or stress at work or a death, it was like alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. So I
Yeah.
couldn't cope within myself. I had no resilience to get through things. And so I think exposing ourselves to challenging things more and more, like it's an incredible place to be at now, where I know no matter what happens in life, like difficult things, I'm not going to need to drink because I've built this coping muscle or have this resilience now, which is incredible.
So beautiful.
Yes. Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I think we have a couple other questions. Been on naltrexone for a month and have seen a big difference. Was a daily drinker before. First 3 weeks alcohol free. I've now had a drink here and there. Is it normal to think and crave a little?
For a month and have seen a big difference. Oh, so just a month. They've been on naltrexone for just a month. Oh, yeah. My cravings didn't go away till the end of, I would say, 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gradually diminishing over time. Yeah, definitely 1 month in, you're still in phase one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, same for me. I mean, my cravings gradually decreased over about 8 to 9 months. They went away, I can say, completely around 8 or 9 months. I was still drinking, but it wasn't from a place of craving or compulsion. It was like a conscious decision of like, "Oh, I'll have a drink tonight." Um, so yeah, the longer you're on naltrexone and TSM, the better it seems to work for most of us. And so what you're experiencing now a month in, it'll just continue to improve from there.
Yeah, yeah, it's exciting.
Um, Someone on Instagram, almost 2 years into TSM, and would say I'm extinct, although I drink like 2 times per week because I still feel like it's a part of my life and I need it socially. Is this normal after 2 years?
Oh,
Well,
wait, go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so I'll say, like, the thing about TSM is you choose the type of relationship you want to have with alcohol. So if you're drinking 2 times a week because it's part of your social life and you're okay with that, I don't see any issue with that. I think most people go on this treatment with the goal to drink moderately and socially, whether that's on holidays or on weekends or whatever that means to you. Um, so if you're, I would say if you feel at peace with your current relationship with alcohol, and when you do
I
drink,
like
you
that.
have control and you're not like obsessing about it when you're not drinking, I would say that that's great. That's extinction and freedom from the dependence. Yeah, ultimately the choice is yours. Again, most people I think want to drink moderately through this treatment. Some end up going alcohol free, but you get to choose. Samara, what would you say to that?
Yeah, no, that was such good advice. I think in my own experience, I kind of had to develop what kind of drinker I would be after I was done with the obsession and it was gone. I was like, well, what am I, how am I going to drink? Like, what kind of person am I going to be with alcohol? So I kind of developed and defined what that would look like, and that's how I came up with that kind of criteria
Yeah.
for how I drink now. And that way, I'm just like you said, I love that you mentioned peace, having peace about the way that you drink. The way I drink is I have peace around it. Like the next morning, I don't feel like absolute crap and I feel good about how I drank and
Yeah.
the night before. And yeah, and even so, I've drank less and less every consecutive year since extinction. So it's just kind of happened naturally. So I allowed things to just kind of unfold naturally and not kind of force myself in any way, but it just naturally happened that I drink less and less and less. And maybe I will just not drink anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's alcohol free. I'm mostly alcohol free now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, ultimately it's like I think that's kind of the cool thing, but it can also be a little bit of like a scary thing because other treatments it's like abstinence is prescriptive, like or like healing from alcohol addiction is prescriptive. You have to be abstinent and it's very clear what success looks like, and if you're not abstinent you're not succeeding. But with TSM it's so much more nuanced. Like I did an interview on my channel a while ago with a gentleman named Jason. You can find it on YouTube. He was still drinking daily at the time of our interview, but he wasn't getting drunk anymore and his life was like back in control. His marriage was restored, but like he was still drinking more than maybe a lot of people would want to be, but he felt really good about where he was at. He was counting on, making more progress, but for him being able to drink daily with control was fine for him. And so we're not here to say you need to drink this much to be successful. It's a personal choice. And research shows that people do better if they are empowered to make their own choices rather than being told what to do. Like you were saying earlier, it's like if you're kind of being constricted too much or being told what to do, you're going to rebel against it and do things differently. So, yeah. And like I've known people I just did an interview too a few weeks ago with a woman. I think she's 4 years on TSM and just now getting to a point where she's like hardly drinking anymore, but she's been a moderate drinker for years on the treatment. So,
oh,
yeah.
Yeah, to answer that question, to continue with that really quick, I just kind of based it on my personal values of like
Mm,
what I find most important in life. And so I often kind of ask myself, like, what am I valuing in life right now? And what keeps coming up for me is my health, like my physical, my mental health. And
yeah.
I know that alcohol impedes that. So I just keep it to a minimum because that's what I value. I value my health more than anything. I value feeling clear-headed and waking up in the morning with energy and not being exhausted and just so those are my strong core values. And then I just kind of designed my drinking style around that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important point to bring up. And like, I think part of phase 3 of TSM is really cultivating a life that has a lot of meaning and purpose in it, where you are really clear on, like you said, the things that you value and you pursue those things above like distraction and pleasure. There's a quote by
So good.
Viktor Frankl where he says something along the lines like, if our life lacks meaning, we will distract ourselves with pleasure. And I found
Wow.
that to be so true. And so, if someone, if drinking is their main purpose and they've gone through this process of TSM and they haven't found other things that they love that they can pour themselves into, hobbies, things, ways to spend their time, it's so easy to keep distracting ourselves with drinking, even if that desire isn't really there because of naltrexone. So to be hungry for seeking out other things that feel really good to you that are benefiting your health and to kind of fill that time and void that we've been using alcohol to fill.
Yeah, even contribution, contributing to back to society. Like what is one way that you can make a difference? I have clients that I have sessions with and they have like a personal mission that if this works for them, that they're going to go back to their doctor and they're going to share that this worked for them and then that doctor is going to have a basis for how being able to treat others. So like that's like a huge like personal mission,
Yeah.
for them to get better and then to spread this awareness to their doctor. And then how many other people can their doctor help?
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yes. 100%. And doing those things, I mean, that feels really good. And that produces a lot of endorphins or helping others, like just little things that you can do to, yeah, rebuild your life to give it more meaning and purpose. And yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated, it can be little things as well. But be hungry for that. If you're not doing that, it's easy to just default back to alcohol. I've seen it with a lot of people on naltrexone where they don't really have a lot going on in life outside of like work and alcohol, for example. Maybe they don't even love their job, or so it's like, okay, well, how can we uncover some hobbies you used to love or cultivate different hobbies and passions and pastimes so that you really feel nourished in that way.
Yeah.
I just want to read Steve's comment because I think it's good to end on this. He says it's important to have the mindset of working with the medication rather than against it. Several members in my group who started TSM while drinking spirits and nevertheless reached extinction. Yeah.
Oh,
Sometimes we can fight the medication where like we're taking it, but then we're not waiting the full hour, or we're taking it, but we're drinking on an empty stomach, or we're drinking shots, right after we take the dose or something. So yeah, I think that's helpful, Steve, to have that mindset to work with the medicine. How can I help it work better rather than fight what it's trying to do? Okay. Thank you guys so much, everyone who joined this live on all the different platforms. Great questions. I hope this was helpful to everybody. As always, you can reach out to us at Thrive, where we run a private online program that is completely centered around the Sinclair method. We really specialize in supporting people through this treatment with courses and community and live groups and workshops and really everything you need to succeed on the method in one place. So reach out, thrivealcoholrecovery.com. Until next time, we'll be back again with another Q&A in about a month from now. So we will see you guys soon. Thanks, everyone.
bye guys.
Bye.